I cannot get Facebook to stop showing me really rubbish, not Viking things, and I'd like unfollow them all, and I'm like begging them to stop showing me.
Yeah.
Because it's that thing where it's like Vikings of the World Fellowship, and it's people from all around the world going, I'm a Viking. Now, it'd be okay. It's all right to just go, I'm a Viking because I'm a brave person who is a traveller. I don't mind that. You know, it's none of my business whether I mind it or not. But it's that, it is back to that I'm a genetic Viking. You know, it's a job. It's not an ethnicity. Again, if people want to enjoy that sort of slightly, you might describe it New Age or something, if they want to enjoy that, I don't mind, but can not be thrust in my face constantly. Yeah. Because it actually drowns out. On Facebook, I follow a load of sort of makers and stuff that are making these. The show started, by the way. You might have been able to tell by the way I'm not talking like an idiot.
Oh right, okay.
I don't know. Apparently, not having introductions is good.
Oh wait, I thought we'd introduce ourselves.
We'll do that in a minute. You do that in a bit. You do a bit, then you go straight in.
Right, this is very clever.
I mean, I don't.
I'm not used to this. I'm just a jobbing academic. I have no idea.
Along for the ride, a mysteriously as yet unintroduced jobbing academic.
Yeah, wearing a scarf indoors for no apparent reason.
But yeah, trying to stop this bombardment that pushes the actual things I want to see, that are like genuine craftspeople spending hours and hours, you know, making these beautiful things that are incredibly researched. I'm just seeing like, I've got a beard like a Viking, and you're like, oh, have you? Good, brilliant. Anyway, yeah, should we? Maybe that'll be the start of the show. Maybe it won't.
Who knows?
It's all in the edit. So my name is John Hodgson. I am the head honcho, this is the phrase we now use, at Handiwork Games. We are a tabletop games company. We make and publish a variety of tabletop games, that many of whom have at least one foot in the idea of history as their source material. And I am joined once again by, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Malcolm Craig, Senior Lecturer in American History at Liverpool John Moores University, and sometime recently has been games designer, but returned to the fold recently, and indoor scarf wearer, because it's quite cold today. That's why we're wearing scarves indoors. It's not just for the aesthetic effects.
I was thinking, I was like, oh no, is this scarf that I've had for years and years a political statement on events in the world at the moment? And then I was like, it's a scarf.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, and I should add that actually my current academic research is into role-playing games and nuclear fear in the Cold War, which I think is germane to my role in all of this.
We're doing it for reasons.
There are actual
for fun.
Legitimate reasons for doing this.
So we have, at the time of recording this, we have another episode as yet unreleased. I was about to start saying when that's going to come out. That's completely pointless saying. That'll come out next week, but as you're watching this,
in the future, this is history.
Yeah, God, it's too much already. So I don't even know where I started with that. This is another episode where we're gonna edit now. It's okay. It's fine. I'll recover my swan-like composure. I'm really losing it. I might have a little drink. It's alright. I will edit this bit. I won't, obviously, for comedy.
I'm just going to say nothing because for comedy.
Best. Let me burn it out, you know.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about this week, we were going to talk about, I think you made a really good suggestion about games and history and games.
And when it goes bad and when it goes right.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, I want to be very clear that this would not be an opportunity, and that we discussed this in advance of this. This is not an opportunity for us to lambast games that we think get it wrong. We'll talk in more general terms than that. But I think it's also an opportunity to praise games by name that get it very right. I think there's an opportunity there. But,
I mean, I was really interested straight away in your thoughts of what games get it right. I mean, I've sort of got... I have read a variety of games, and some of which appeal to me more than others. But as you say, I was instantly struck by the enormous sort of subjective quality in that, and about how many I've read and not read to give a fair assessment. I also think it's very interesting in the games that I think neither of us want to name and shame anyone.
No,
It's not,
no.
because it's just too subjective. And as we've been talking about in previous episodes about history being provisional, I think there's something to come back to in that as well. But maybe look at the structure involved in how things go wrong and why they go wrong.
Yeah.
And I think I think we might pause a few times when I think of some of the games that I know we have definitely spoken about before where it goes wrong, that veers into some interesting areas, I think.
Yes.
That we are possibly wildly underqualified to talk about.
Absolutely.
By dint of like our identity.
Yes.
We're really, all we can do is perhaps point to a thing and go, someone more qualified than us should actually talk about this, but we can at least go, we know we and the people that made that game were not qualified to do it. That's a good start. But why don't we start with some positives? Actually, that always reduces engagement with videos, positivity.
So two games that really spring to mind, and both of them deal with incredibly difficult subjects, and that is the Holocaust. And there is a subject which, because of its very nature, I don't think I need to expand on the nature of it, but because of the very nature of this event, it is so huge that how do you deal with that in a game? And I thought that it's quite it's a game supplement, not the game itself, but the Showa supplement for White Wolf's Wraith game. There was a supplement dealing specifically with the Holocaust that had every opportunity just to be pornographic and voyeuristic and just unpleasantly making use of unimaginable suffering in the name of it, and it doesn't. And I think that's one game supplement that's always held up as an example of a very sympathetic, subtle, nuanced approach to incredibly difficult subject matter. Whether anyone's ever played using that supplement, I don't know.
That's
as a piece of work.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing.
Well.
That there may be an occasion to have a game supplement within the context of a game line that tackles an issue that isn't necessarily meant to be played. I think that supplement was meant to be played, but in a way it doesn't matter if it's not played because of the gravity of the subject matter. I was going to say, like, thinking from my position as a publisher, I just wouldn't dare touch that. It's beyond me and my powers of my sort of qualification would be to go no, like too much. I think, and it's again, interestingly, it is someone else's story to tell. I think, who has much more direct. That's an interesting thing to talk about. Actually, why do I think that certain topics need to be told by people with direct experience? Because I know there are arguments to say no, that's not necessary. But I struggle with them. I think, some things are so massive.
But I think the other one that kind of come out is a more recent than Showa. But still, actually, it's been out for a long time. It was Jason Morningstar's Grey Ranks. About child soldiers during the Warsaw Uprising. And again, you're dealing with a horrific, incredibly destructive, brutal event. And yet, Jason produced that game in consultation with organisations in Poland, memorial groups, and it handled this question of, kids finding love in the midst of this horror and awfulness in a very sensitive, nuanced way. It's not a perfect game. I think Jason would say that, but it handles its subject matter of an appallingly difficult period in history. I would not write that game, but it handles it very well. And I think because Jason had the intelligence and the sensitivity and the compassion to produce a game like that and engage with groups in Poland who would be interested in that topic, it created something that I think there were criticisms made of it, I remember, came out, and I think they were all totally unfounded. That this should not be a subject for a game.
But there's that argument that it's I think this is quite interesting that it's like misery tourism that you're using.
That was the term that was used. Yes,
something so horrendous for entertainment. But I think there's an interesting idea where you have to almost the price of admission to a game like that is that it is not entertainment in the way you would play something like Dungeons and Dragons.
No.
Vanilla Dungeons and Dragons, before I upset anyone who plays a really heavyweight Dungeons and Dragons games, which a heavyweight Dungeons and Dragons game, which is entirely possible to do. You know, there's no reason why loads of different games can't handle heavyweight subject matter, but being built specifically to deal with them. And I think, the price of entry is that you accept it is not where you are not going to be laughing and joking. You are not going to be, making Monty Python references while you play it. You will probably learn something while you play it, and it might be quite difficult. And I know there are people out there who, I don't know why I'm sort of representing them because I don't necessarily agree with this. I think that is a fine aim with a game. I think the art of tabletop role-playing games can handle that if everyone buys in to that premise. I think if a player turned up at the game expecting it to be, a cliched, fun adventure game, they're going to really struggle. And
I think there was a period of this kind of like 2000 to 2010, especially in the kind of like, to use the blanket term, indie games design. There were games that, and still do actually in independent games design, I'm not kind of like saying there was a cut-off point in 2010, that actually dealt with very challenging subjects. Grey Ranks is one. I might get the name of the game wrong. Julia Bond Ellingbo's Roll Jordan Roll, I think it was called.
Runaway Jordan, maybe?
Steal Away Jordan.
Steal Away Jordan,
That's the one. Because Roll Jordan Roll is a spiritual. Steal Away Jordan, about the experience of slavery and enslaved people and everything. And again, that was a very thoughtful, nuanced game written by someone perfectly capable and entitled to produce a game such as that. And those games, I think, were very unfairly criticised. The idea of people who just go, it's misery tourism. It's like, no, it's a different kind of game. You're telling different kinds of stories. You're having a different experience.
I think there's a reaction. Again, why am I on today? I'm on this devil's advocate bench today, apparently. Okay, I'll do it. I think sometimes there's a reaction to seeing people who have played those games online where they claim some sort of valor for having played them and that they are cleverer and better for having played those instead of just playing routine games. And I understand that annoyance, but I don't think that characterises the games themselves. And I think every game has people who play it that are a bit annoying for a whole variety of reasons. And I think you would have to take that up with the people that were annoying you if that's how it went. But I think the games themselves don't. Well, no. From my position as devil's advocate, that it would be those games encourage those worse impulses of people to be sort of holier than thou, and sort of priggish about superior kinds of entertainment. I don't really see it. I got a fine art degree in abstract painting. I got no qualification to sort of comment on, being pretentious. But I thought they were really interesting, and I think those games and many other games.
Others,
I feel like I've come to this knife fight unarmed because there's a whole bunch of games, and I know there's a bunch of them behind there that I picked up at Tabletop Scotland that deal with like a load of different heavyweight stuff. It's still going on.
Yes, absolutely.
Loads of games being written now, but in particular, talking about this period.
But I mean, there's a kind of like a thing there where the games that don't explicitly engage. Well, so Cold City is a useful example because we're working on the redevelopment of that game at the moment, and that's 1950 in Berlin. For those who don't know, it's about monster hunting nominally, and you can play that game in different modes. There is recommendations in the game for how you play. If you want to play it pulpy, so basically Indiana Jones style, a Nazi appears, you punch the Nazi, he falls under a truck, all that kind of thing. Or you can play it in a very, serious mode of dealing with the awfulness of history. And I played games that cover the entire spectrum in Cold City and in Hot War, which we're also working on, that cover the entire spectrum and sometimes manage to do weave things together.
See, that's a really good sorry to interrupt, but that's a really good idea to build into the game before you start, that everyone understands the mode in which you're playing is a really smart.
Well, this has always been part of like Cold City and Hot War, is that you're there. Now this is showing my kind of like externalization of memory. I remember there's pulp, film noir. There's the comedy one, but not black comedy.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so
yes.
we're thinking of Doctor Strangelove,
Yes.
the bed sitting room, stuff like that, rather than
Yes.
anything else.
Fear of the absurd,
And then
the absurdity of it, rather than Benny Hill.
I can't remember the other one. There's other ones in there. I should reach down and pick it up and flick through on camera. It's terrible. I can't even remember this stuff. But that's part of the process of, you know, creating your moment of play. How are you going to be playing this, and deciding. Part of it is also kind of deciding what kind of histories you're going to draw upon in order to provide this kind of like contextual underpinning for your game, which is, for me, is a really important part of that collective process of deciding how you're going to approach a topic.
It's really interesting how that sort of draws into the game. I was suddenly thinking early on, I was kind of separating out an audience reaction to a game and the game in the sort of, here's the text and here's these things that exist outside the text. You know, and as a dedicated follower of, is it Foucault or Derrida? No, I don't know, I can't remember. So I was nearly healed from my art school experiences. But, you know, there being no outside of the text, and actually perhaps the audience reaction to these games is the game. You know, you can't separate it as quite as easily as I was blithely doing there. And actually a way to deal with that is to support the way, you know, support taking decisions as a group on the way you're playing it, being explicit about that, and acknowledging that people play in different ways. Yeah. Because I was thinking while you were speaking, I was just wandering off mentally. No, that isn't what I was doing.
I am a very boring man.
I was sort of thinking on the topic that why, if I was a person that found, say, grey ranks really difficult, that it exists, and if I thought it shouldn't exist, perhaps why would be some reasons for that. And I think part of it could be the fear that I would be forced to play a game that I didn't want to play, that dealt with very heavy topics like that, and I don't want to. I might play, you know, I don't want to keep saying D&D, as if I hate the way D&D gets held up by people, including me, apparently, for being like this slightly lightweight thing. But if I just want to play a dungeon adventure game, and then I turn up to the session and I'm told, oh no, we're going to play this really heavy game about, you know, really dreadful things that happened in World War II, and I didn't want to, perhaps I could feel something was being taken away from me. I'm not sure I can really...
Well, there's that thing in kind of games where you have kind of your lines and veils, your stuff that you just don't want to see. I mean, for me, something I never want to see in any game I'm participating in is stuff like child abuse.
Yeah.
You know, fade to black. I don't want... sexual assault, child abuse. I'm super uncomfortable with having that in games. Some people can use those themes in ways that work. Often, no, it doesn't. I think there are games. I'm thinking of one long-standing game in particular, which those kind of things are very prevalent in the setting, and for me, it always read like voyeuristic pornography. But I think that also applies. Your lines and veils can also apply to history. The stuff you do not want to see. I can perfectly understand that someone might not want to engage with a game that touches upon the Holocaust, or perhaps touches upon even the early modern witch trials in Scotland, which were, I mean, per head of population, per capita, there were more witch trials and persecutions in Scotland than anywhere else in Europe.
Why was that? I mean, I'm not really expecting you to give me an answer, but like...
Crazed Presbyterians, one can only assume. No,
quite a dedicated sort of religious community still persist in Scotland, and not just around football.
I would direct people interested in that. I don't have an answer to that. I think one of the acknowledged experts in this area is Professor Julian Goodare at the University of Edinburgh. So I think if anyone wants an answer to that question, I would direct them to Professor Goodare's work, because I understand that he's a real expert on this topic. So go and read Julian Goodare if you're interested in the early modern Scottish witch trials. Yeah,
I was about to start anecdoting about things I've heard about in sort of the Western Isles and stuff, and the way, you know, some pretty tight, you know, sort of Protestantism is.
Free Church of Scotland, which that's a phenomenon of the mid 19th century, mid to late 19th century. I think the Free Church emerges and the split and everything. So that's
no dancing
nothing to do with it. Yeah,
tourists going to Skye and trying to get a drink on a Sunday. What have you?
But those are just the Holocaust and witch trial are just two examples of things that people might not want to engage with, and there could be a lot more recent history, or the institution of slavery in the United States, games set in that period that involve that might be something people quite legitimately do not want to engage with, and that's fine. But that's not to say that games that involve that shouldn't exist if they handle it in an appropriately nuanced and sensitive manner.
I think it's good for something we did. This is sort of quite unusual for me. That I'm totally happy to talk about a game we worked on, and we both worked on together at Cubicle 7, where I used to be creative director. World War Cthulhu.
Yes.
And we had very clear guidelines about what was going to be appropriate for mixing the Cthulhu mythos with events in World War II, and that we would never have it that the Cthulhus were the reason for atrocities.
And that's a standing axiom for Cold City, Hot War, that you do not use the supernatural to excuse human action.
It was quite remarkable because we spent a lot of time on that and really spent a lot of time talking about it and thinking it through. Meanwhile, there was a game that they had the same genesis, and the author sold manuscripts to both companies. Acton Cthulhu happened at the same time. Now, the name Acton Cthulhu kind of signifies it's much more Commando Comics version of
more pulpy.
And they seem to be untroubled by those kind of thoughts, because as a whole, for a while, Modiphius was selling Black Sun badges, and it's like, can you do? I don't think you can do that, can you? And again, I think it's very much coming from a sort of boys' own comics view of World War II. It's not. I find that horrific, but I also, knowing many people that worked there or still work there, they just view it in a different way, and it's entertainment.
And I think the same applied to what I know you invited me to work on certain aspects of the Cold War Cthulhu games, and we had the same approach. The stuff that happens in this period, because the game was set in the 1970s, but we were dealing with it, that the stuff that happens should not be, the horrors that genuinely existed should not be explained by it's Cthulhu, or it's the King in Yellow is behind all of this, the Rhodesian white supremacist regime are kind of that's not the explanation for it. Ian Smith was a racist because Ian Smith was a racist, not because the King in Yellow got to him.
It was I had an amazing journey on that game, and straight away you go, the 1970s. I'm thinking about Berlin and the sort of various things that went on there. In the 70s, you go, this is a really good setting. It's quite meaty. I'm thinking about David Bowie in Berlin, the sort of 70s. And then you start to read about it, and you go, the 70s was a really bad time, actually. And I didn't know sort of that I grew up, my first, 10 years of life, what have you. The 1970s is a dreadful time, really. Into, the end of sort of funding for espionage. I don't know why I'm talking about what went on in the 70s when you're here and senior lecturing conversation. But imagine me as I want to take you on my little journey where you go, this is a lot sort of what I've sort of thought as like disco and like sort of orange and brown things, the 70s. And you go, no, this is a dreadful time where everyone's lost their way. The post-war sort of the glow is completely gone from the sort of post-war recovery and all that, and the world seems to just be in decline, and then you realise sort of James Bond, if you're talking about espionage, James Bond in the 70s, that's sort of interesting. But then you go, he exists in a time where the British government are like sort of propping up apartheid regimes in a very sort of material way, not just a sort of, we don't want to go against, our old colonies or something. It's like, no shit, they're like funding, they're saying military help. There was
a really interesting kind of like aspect when I remember working on that, the Cold War, particularly the Cold War Cthulhu project, and the you kind of like were like, right, here we have to do these kind of like regions around the world and have a situation there for players to expand upon and GMs to expand upon, and you were like, okay, here's the ones that I think are more difficult, Malcolm. Can you do these?
Yeah.
And it was Rhodesia, Northern Ireland. I can't remember the other ones that I wrote.
Yeah.
And it was all the ones like, here's the ones that need a bit of a sensitive hand.
When you start to read it, like, I like to think of myself as relatively worldly, relatively well read. I would never claim any sort of greatness in any of those fields. But you start to actually read about them. You go, I don't know anything about conflict in Northern Ireland. I did we studied it in school, and actually it was, having read more, our sort of grounding, sort of foundation from the school course was actually good. It was good. There was stuff about going way back, and the British had no sort of positive glow put on them at all in that course, which is kind of funny because now I think there's this big reactionary movement against, we're all being taught to be ashamed of being British. Well, I was taught some pretty grim stuff about what the British got up to in that would be the 80s, whatever. It was still ongoing. It was before the end of that conflict. So this is not a new thing.
Well, I think I've talked to our university. We have quite a lot of history students come from Northern Ireland to us in Liverpool, and it's interesting having discussions with them because I certainly feel that on this side of the Irish Sea, that the relationship between Britain and Ireland is desperately undertaught. Mm-hmm. And there's too little acknowledgement of that is given in favour of let's learn about the Tudors and let's learn about the I mean, I'm being very unfair to school history teachers here who have to adhere to very strict syllabi, who can only do certain things, and school teachers are some of the hardest working people there is, and they're very much more restricted than we are at university. Right. I still think it's a subject that's desperately undertaught. And related to this, going back to games, would I ever write a game that had anything to do with the Troubles? Absolutely not. I would not have the knowledge to do that, and I don't have the right to do that. Yeah. That's not me. I can, from the perspective of, and I think when it came to Cold War Cthulhu, I was always writing as this is British intelligence looking at who did some awful shit in Ireland,
and we were never we weren't making the whole framework of the game. Like, it was like we came to you for sort of information about that people could use in their games, and I knew if I got you to write it, it would at least have some basis in some sort of academic rigor.
I did remember because I also wrote the basic history section of the 1970s and everything. And I remember someone, I think it might be an RPG Net, someone wrote a review, a very positive review of Cold War Cthulhu, and they said, the history section's really good. It's almost as if they got an actual historian to write it.
Almost.
And I was like, yes, I am almost an actual historian, that is true.
That was good. There was a good team on that stuff.
It was I think, yeah.
It's all been sold to Chaosium now, I believe.
Has it?
So it might see the light of day again.
I'll be tapping them up for some money for reprints.
Yeah, you will.
I'll be lucky. It'd be like getting money out of academic publishing. It just doesn't happen.
As I tell a random anecdote, my favourite character that someone that wasn't you wrote in the 1970s Cold War Cthulhu stuff was Ken Spencer, who is coming to Edinburgh this year. I hope that's all right if I say that, Ken. I hope you're not under any sort of curfew or anything. I want to get you in trouble internationally. And he wrote a secretary that worked, who happened to be a woman who worked in one of the American intelligence agencies, and she had been passed over for promotion, and so started selling secrets to the Russians, and it was the most human and
Soviets, not Russians.
Oh, sorry, they were not the Russians, to the Soviets. And it was just, it rang true as a character, do you know what I mean? Rather than, and again, it didn't involve the Cthulhus. It wasn't a sort of idealized version of someone who, sort of Kim Philby character in the British. It was just someone that was fed up with the way they were treated, and those people exist. That has a good sort of history,
but that actually has because in the it's one of the fascinating bits about by the time that the second Red Scare in America, so after World War II, really reaches its peak, 47 onwards, about Reds under the beds, oh my god, spies and all that, because there have been, the Manhattan Project developed the atomic bomb, was riddled with spies. But when the Red Scare is really in the late 40s into the 50s, there aren't any.
Right.
They've all gone. The networks have been shut down.
Yeah.
And Soviet intelligence agencies, I mean, you have the complexity of all these name changes. You go, NKVD, then you get the kind of the MGB, and then you get the KGB and all these kind of things. And you also have the GRU, who are military intelligence. But by the time you get to the kind of post-World War II, post-1940s period, Soviet intelligence have realised that they cannot rely on ideological motivations for people to spy for them anymore. So therefore, they start using disillusionment and money. And that's how they get people to pass secrets to them. It's just the old-fashioned, here's some of the green stuff, or you've not been given a promotion, here's also some green stuff.
It's just fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it's back to the same old thing that we keep coming back to about doing the reading, because the real stuff is so fascinating, I think, of why people do things. That's a really interesting why. We'll come to why on maybe another episode. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I was just thinking, challenging myself, isn't it interesting how I have no problem with deciding I can empathise with the mind of a 1970s woman secretary in America. That's cool for me to do that. But I won't. I won't do a woman in. I would have great reticence, as you've expressed, to write a woman character in 1970s Belfast. I would need to know so much more before I would touch that. I don't know. It's fascinating, that, isn't it? I don't know where those lines are.
There's also. I mean, we have kind of all these kind of things about history. I mean, our kind of like, we have kind of like mental proximity to different parts of history and different places and everything. I think because of we grew up in the same period, we're pretty much the same age, that the United States in the 70s and 80s was so much more of a cultural presence. Whereas Northern Ireland was something that you saw on the TV, and it was the bombs and the guns and that's what you understand. Whereas there was this cultural influence of so we have this greater mental proximity, weirdly, to the United States when compared to Ireland, even though Ireland is just like there.
It's weird, we're just talking a lot about Ireland, but I think it's a really good example of, we grew up in close proximity to that conflict. I've lost a good friend of mine, actually. He died in an IRA bomb. Was it an IRA bomb? I think it was an IRA bomb. You suddenly start questioning myself. But I've been thinking back recently to a lot of that, and terms like, you remember in the news, it'd be like gunman and IRA, gunman. Gunman is sort of, that's quite... there's quite a lot of sort of propaganda in that, isn't there?
We have soldiers, they have gunmen.
Yeah, gunman. Yeah. Gunman. And that was just a normal phrase, and I haven't heard it in years and years and years. Oh, that's nice for me, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Check my privilege. But, oh God, and it was just normal. Because we were talking about this a few weeks back. I was really shocked at how little I know about Ireland.
Yeah, likewise. Absolutely likewise.
It's really rude, actually. I could look at a map of sort of, England, Wales, Scotland and point to all the big cities. Ireland, it's pathetic. It's really, really sad. And I know people who live there, and I don't know where. I can't point to their, I've been working with Gar lately. I don't know.
Gar's still in Cork, isn't he?
Yeah.
But I point to Cork, surely.
No, well, maybe.
That's shameful.
I know it is, but it
shameful.
is. And then I was thinking about the structure of, like, when you imagine a map and these two islands, not Ireland, islands near each other, absolutely separated by this weird cultural thing that has occurred between two peoples, if you like. I mean, many peoples in both of those places.
500 years of brutal colonisation.
Yeah, and I like how I just go, yeah, yeah, that. But it's massive, actually, that I don't know anything about that place so close to where I live, and I have a lot of unexamined prejudice that I hope I don't act on. And I think if I found myself about to be acting a sort of prejudicial way, I would go, hang on, where's that come from? But you grow up with English, Irishman, Scotsman jokes.
Yeah.
And you go, and well, it's a bit like being an immigrant to Scotland and learning why Scottish people don't necessarily like your comedy Scottish accent, because it's just constant.
Yeah.
Constant. And you're like, and I get it I'm English sort of well, I can't really even say naturalised Scottish. I've been here longer than anywhere else, and I get it. My American friends think I'm Scottish, which is sort of very kind of them, sort of. But then instantly start doing a Scottish accent. You go, can you not do that?
I had that at a...
And I can't claim it. You know, it just annoys me.
I had that at an academic conference down in Oxford, an American history event, and there was one person. They were a lovely person, but every time they spoke to me, they would put on a comedy Scottish accent, and we're sitting there in the bar after the I'm going, could you just please stop doing that? And they thought it was hilarious. I'm like, no, genuinely, I'm getting really offended here. Please stop doing the okay, Jimmy, the new, kind of accent.
It's really.
I can't even do a convincing fake Scottish accent. That's the worst thing about it.
I can't hear your Scottish accent anymore, but I don't have a Scottish accent. Yeah, I don't see accents.
I don't see Scotsmen. I'm just the non-people to you and your kind.
Good grief!
I think we edit that bit out there. That's going.
A bit far.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do we get this back to games? But I think that sort of cultural sensitivity. I think you could. When we started out talking about when games do things right and when they do things wrongly, and I think things can go very badly wrong where you assume your common sense knowledge of a place, your general knowledge of what a place is about or a period in history, or a people in history, that's just sort of right and everyone knows that's what it was like. And it is interesting again. We can't just keep doing the reading episode, but I got a load of books. I'm just looking at a big pile of some of them over the Christmas period. And there was a couple of books I was reading. I was like, I don't think that's right. I don't think that. And books that are, what am I talking about? Let's be very specific. I want to get the titles right. Oh, I've stood the thing on it. It's the top book that my camera is sat on. It's.
Is it Hakimadi's?
Yes.
African and Caribbean people in Britain.
And I just thought it looked like a really interesting book, and I'm very interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
But we were talking earlier before we started filming. There's a really interesting book. It's just coming out in paperback. It's been out in hardback for a while. Caroline Dodds-Pennock's book on Savage Shores. I hope I get the name right. And it's about Indigenous Americans in Europe during the period of colonisation and about their experiences of Europe and Europeans and all that, and it's getting amazing reviews, and it's a brilliant book. Need to get hold of a copy of that. In fact, I've already got a copy ordered. What am I saying? That looks a really exciting book.
I've got 2 points I've absolutely got to finish. The
Hakimadi.
I don't read and remember names. It's really bad because in my blithe games designy way.
Can I just? It's a really good pile because you've got Adi's book, and then below it is Nell Irvin Painter's brilliant The History of White People, which is an amazing book.
And I've been cutting between the two. But in the beginning of that book, it talks about prehistory, which is at the moment we're at deep history, which is of specific interest, and I am continuing to research two sort of projects. One about Neanderthal people, one about continuing work on Mesolithic period, and. I have special interest in all the characters in our Mask Witches of Forgotten Doggerland have dark skin, because we know from DNA evidence it's very, very likely that people in that period at that time all had dark skin, blue eyes, blue or green eyes, which is really, I find absolutely fascinating, because that group of people, the Northwest European hunter-gatherer people, are arguably not really our ancestors. It's a genetic group that kind of dies out. And waves of movement of genes across Europe. It's such a complicated topic that I hope to do it justice. But I find it a fascinating idea that there's this predecessor people who are, they're Homo sapiens, they're definitely related to us very directly, but they are not our direct ancestors geographically, if you like. And they have these traits that we as modern people attach enormous identity to, things like colour of skin, colour of eyes, but they it's a bit mixed up, and of course those people didn't have those same outlooks, and I'm never going to get to the point I was making. And at the beginning of this book, it suggests when the author defines terms, he wants to use people with dark skin. He wants to refer to as African or Caribbean. And it was quite interesting because he's talking about the Northwest European hunter-gatherers and referring to them as African. And I was like, I'm not sure that's right. And it was good. I felt quite grown up because I wasn't like, oh, that's wrong. I was like, I need to go and read about this because this is not my understanding. My understanding, which it turns out, spoiler, was wrong, was that was that skin colour, sort of the gene that was controlling that skin colour was not directly related to Homo sapiens leaving the continent of Africa, and that persisted. It did. And I was wrong, and I was really glad to find out.
That's learning.
Yeah,
there you go.
It was like, I was like, oh shit, and because I thought, feels to me. I like the point being made in this book. I like looking, the sort of corrections that are being made, and removing and attempts to remove some of the whitewashing of history that's gone on. I'm all for that, but I thought, I don't know that this is right, and I went checking. Of course, it was. Because I haven't written a book that's like been really well researched and which a person has staked their academic reputation on. So more fool me. But it was a brilliant feeling. When you go, I don't think that's right, and then you look it up and you've learned something. That was great.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Every day is a school day, as they say.
And then you had said something that there was a really interesting point about, but that's long gone now out of my.
Well, we can maybe carry on. If you recall that, we can talk about that in the next.
Yeah.
The next episode, because I think we've covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah, so we're sort of, if we had to have a conclusion, which I don't think we're particularly good at, and I don't want to be, I think there's a lot of things, aren't there?
The conclusion is always the weakest part of any academic writing I've ever done.
Sieve it yourself,
Yeah.
But it is about a sort of sensitivity, isn't it? To things are quite complicated, and there are people who I think are better placed to tell certain stories than other people.
And I think it hinges on your final point there, though. Always be willing to learn.
Yeah.
That's central to it. Just be willing to learn and be willing to admit when you're wrong or when you don't know.
I've been going to that thing where I've realised just how stupid I am recently. The more books I read, I'm like, I don't know anything about anything.
I always say to this to students that the value of our conversations every day in our interactions with people would be immensely improved by the more regular deployment of people just going, I don't know.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Just say, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with that, because if you don't know, you can learn. And the more you learn, the more you realise how little you know.
It's good, isn't it?
Boom, mic drop. There we go. What an insight from Malcolm Craig. This is what I'm paid for. Yeah.
Brilliant. Out of the studio. See how I called it the studio? Anyway, we'll just fade out there. That's good. Good grief. I'm going to stop.